Joni, who cowered in Michael's shadow. "Ma'am?" "Come inside, Detective. Joni will fix you up some nice lemonade," Michael said, letting them both step in before him. The two men sat down, and Joni slipped silently into the kitchen. "You're not from around these parts, are you, son?" Michael asked, rubbing his fingers over a stained spot on the table. "Why, no, Reverend, I'm not. I'm from over in Josie. Small town, good people, just like here." Nathan leaned his lanky frame back in the chair and took off his hat. "I just have a few questions about Tyler Campbell drowning at your church," he began, pulling out a dog-eared notepad. "I know you weren't there, but I thought you might be able to help me out on a few points." "A tragedy," Joni murmured, struggling to set the 2 glasses of lemonade in front of the men without her hands shaking. Nathan's eyes focused on Joni's bandaged hands and flicked back to Michael. "Thanks," Nathan said. Michael massaged the bridge of his nose. Joni pulled the chair over beside her husband. "Yeah, we're going to have a special service tomorrow morning," Michael said wearily. "Tyler was a sweet boy, and this is a great shock to the community. Mrs. Campbell is devastated." Put a hand over his eyes, and Joni patted his leg beneath the table. "Oh, I'm sure she is. Well, I already spoke to Kelsey Weston. Nice girl," Nathan began, and Michael shifted in his seat. Nathan continued to ask questions about the church and the daycare service, which Michael answered as briefly as possible. After 15 minutes, Joni spoke up again. "It was a tragic accident," she said soothingly, before swallowing her painkillers. Michael stared at Nathan until he blinked. "Uh-huh. Well, it certainly looks that way," Nathan said, and crossing his cowboy boots and getting up. He took one last swig of lemonade and wiped his mouth on the back of his hand. "If I need anything else, I'll let you know," he said, tucking his notepad back in his shirt pocket. "Please do," Michael said, as he and Joni rose. Nathan shook Michael's hand and placed a tentative hand on Joni's shoulder. She smiled. "You guys doing all right? We're almost done. Into the big finish. Someone else is going to die."
Aww. Spoiler.
Spoiler. You guys can guess. 11:45 a.m., Wednesday, July 20th. The minister's house. Michael sat in his car, glancing anxiously at his porch every few seconds. He pressed the 6 speed dial on his phone. "Michael?" A girl's voice answered. "Kelsey, listen to me." "Why haven't you called?" she shrieked, and Michael held the phone away from his ear. "I've been busy, I'm sorry," he replied tersely. "You weren't at service this morning." "I was sick." "What did you tell the police?" "Exactly what you told me to," she said, her voice getting quieter. "I talked to the detective, and it looks like it's going to be declared an accidental drowning. We just have to ride this out." Kelsey sniffled in the background. "Look, can you meet me at my office tonight at 10? "Yeah, I guess, but this isn't a game, Michael. A little boy is dead." Michael closed his eyes. "I know, baby." He snapped his phone shut and went to the house. "Joni," he called. Leaving his shoes on, he walked down the hallway. The bedroom door hung open, and he switched the light on. Finding the room empty, he turned around and faced the bathroom door. He tried the doorknob, but it was locked. "Unlock this damn door," he hollered, rattling the knob again. "Okay, just stand back." He backed up and gave the door a solid kick. It splintered open and bumped into something on the floor. "Jesus, Joni." Pills were sprinkled all over the yellowed and peeling linoleum. She was sitting with her back propped up against the wall, her head lolled forward on her chest. Her baby blue dress was shoved up above her knees, revealing the edges of lavender panties. Vomit dried in a pool on the floor. "Joni," he whispered fiercely, feeling her neck for a pulse. She looked up, tears running down her sunken cheeks. "I was too scared to do it," she whispered, her voice husky, "but I wanted to." Michael cried out, a low, guttural sound of anguish. He gathered her in his arms and started crying. She was a rag doll in his grip. The light bulb flickered nervously. "Michael?" "Yeah, honey," he said, putting his shirt sleeve across his nose. "I wish I could have had children," she said, with a sad, soft smile. He looked into her eyes and shook his head slowly. As he pulled her up, the pills rolled like candy under her feet, and she slipped, giggling. He lifted her into his arms and moved her into the tub. She didn't resist as he stripped off her clothes and placed her bandaged hands on the edges of the tub. He turned the faucet on and began to stroke her arm tenderly with the warm, soapy water. "How do you feel about the 7th commandment, Reverend?" She faced him, her eyes bloodshot and yellowish. closed his eyes briefly and took a measured breath. I stopped believing in God when we ran out of money for your treatments. She turned her head back up at the ceiling. I see, she said flatly. He started to speak again, but she cut him off. You chose me, Michael, above all the other girls in Benton. Do you remember? He took one of her bandaged hands in his and kissed it gently. I want to make this right, he said, not meeting her eyes. Then make it right. The light bulb flickered out with a buzz. 9:50 p.m. Wednesday, July 20th. Praise Fellowship Assembly of God. Mosquitoes smacked against the window by Michael's head, and he scratched the bite on his hand nervously. From beneath his desk, he took out 2 plastic cups and a box of Frandia red wine. He filled the cups and shivered in spite of the heat. Fishing in his pocket, he pulled out some of Joni's pills, a mix of Xanax, Vicodin, and Oxycontin. The pills fizzed angrily as they sank to the bottom of the cup. There was a hesitant knock at the door. I'm here. Kelsey slunk in, not meeting Michael's eyes. She dropped herself into the padded chair opposite him. Michael pushed the glass of wine toward her, and she cradled it in her hands like a baby. The fan whirred above them lazily, and Michael cleared his throat. This is all my fault, she moaned. What's done is done, he said, shrugging and drinking his wine. Do you think we'll ever be forgiven? She asked before she drank. God hasn't been in touch with me lately, Michael replied, laughing uneasily. Tears swelled up in her eyes. Everywhere I go, people stare at me, especially Mrs. Campbell. Kelsey buried her head in her hands, crying. I'm so miserable. When I was in Al's buying bread, she called me a monster. Kelsey hiccuped. He reached out to her. But that's not the worst of it. Michael, honey, I'm pregnant. She drank the rest of her wine in a hurried gulp, and Michael's hand froze in the air. Say something. Her head drooped onto the desk. Her eyes began to drift shut. What's wrong with me? She mumbled. Michael stared at her, his eyes growing unnaturally wide. What have you done? She whispered, slipping into unconsciousness. Michael lurched out of his chair and stumbled around the desk. This is your fault, he howled, shaking her. Her head flopped back and forth violently. This is all your fault. Half-formed sobs twisted in his throat. I'm sorry. He let her slump back into the chair. He backed away, holding his hands up in surrender. After staring at Kelsey for a moment, he took his cell phone out. He started to call 911. But then he shut the phone with deliberate slowness. Carefully, he gathered her in his arms. Tears trickled down his face, and he clenched his jaw. Kelsey's shallow breathing caressed his neck like butterfly wings as he carried her into the sanctuary. She was heavier than Joni, but not by much. Moonlight filtered in through the window behind the pulpit. Gently, he put her down on the edge of the tub. He kissed her lax lips. Goodbye, Kelsey. I really am sorry. He let her go, his breath coming in uneven gulps. She sank gracefully to the bottom, her hair fanning out in silky tendrils. Her eyes remained closed as the sweet 16 charm on her necklace sparkled in the moonlight. On the edge of the pool, he placed a piece of paper that had been folded into a square. A string of air bubbles fought their way to the surface of the water. Michael started shaking as the bubbles grew smaller. 11:30 p.m. Wednesday, July 20th, the minister's house. Michael pulled into the driveway, turning off his lights, putting the car in neutral. When he got out, he pushed the door shut as quietly as possible. The crunch of the gravel under his shoes echoed in the hot night, but nobody turned the porch light on. He doubled over and threw up cheap wine. When a mosquito bit his face, he smacked it. He spit into the steaming dust at his feet and took a few unsteady steps forward. He opened the screen door with painful slowness. In the bedroom, their seashell nightlight cast a warm glow on Joni's figure beneath the sheets. He tucked his shirt over his head and slipped off his pants, wincing as the belt buckle clanked against the floor. Joni didn't stir. Tiptoeing to the side of the bed, he slipped in beside his wife. He traced one finger along her jawline and let it rest in the hollow beneath her ear, checking for a pulse. I love you, sweetie. The end.